All rise.
All right, please be seated. Okay, we are back on the record. Weinmiller, you had raised an issue. Do you want to summarize it?
Your Honor, we had a report over the lunch hour that one of the jurors was overheard in passing out of the Starbucks on the street, discussing the case, specifically making comments that suggested that she had already made a conclusion about the case, that she also was mindful of the press coverage, thought it was getting more coverage than it deserved, and then went on to share some evidence of an unknown nature, but was pretty clearly discussing the evidence with this friend or acquaintance that she saw on the street. And all of those things, I think, violate the court's directives and the assurances that the jurors gave us in advance. So,
all right, and I believe there was a witness you were going to call who actually overheard the conversation.
Brittany Davidson. Davis, I'm sorry.
All right, Ms. Davis, why don't we have you come on up here, and we'll have you come into the witness box, but don't sit down. Just go ahead and step into there, and I'll have my clerk give you an oath.
Okay, I'll have you raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated. And then you can go ahead and take off your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I'll just ask you to please state and spell your full name.
It's Brittany Davis, Brittanydavis.
And Ms. Davis, I think it might just be easiest if I ask you the questions. Why don't you sort of take us through where you were going and what you observed?
I was just on lunch and I was walking back to the parking garage and I walked past the Starbucks and the person was coming out of the Starbucks and I happened to hear it.
And which Starbucks are you referring to?
I want to say it's on 2nd. It's the closest one to the courthouse right over here, kind of by the elephants. I'm not 100% sure on the streets.
All right. And can you describe what the person looked like?
I noted that she had a ponytail and she was wearing a black shirt and tan boots. There was no badge.
Okay, this was today?
Yes.
And just so I'm clear, were you going into the Starbucks?
No, I was walking past. They were coming out.
Coming out of the Starbucks. And when you say they, who else was with this person?
She was talking to a male.
And why don't you just take us through, as best as you remember, what you heard?
So he said something, but I didn't hear the full. All I heard was basically, I got the gist of what are you doing down here? And I heard her say that she was a juror on the trial for the author who killed her husband. And then he said something, I couldn't really hear it. And then I heard her say that it's getting more attention than it should. And then there was more like background noise. And then all I heard her say was something about they put it up on the screen. And she was still talking, but it started pouring down rain and I couldn't really hear anything at that point.
Okay. All right. I'll ask defense first if you have any additional questions you want to ask.
Just, did you notice her hairstyle?
Ponytail.
What kind of hair though? What color?
Brown.
Nothing further.
Okay. Anything from the state?
I don't really have any questions, Ryan. I guess I just want to make sure that we know or get the best description. I know you just, this is in passing, so I apologize, but we want to make sure we know who we're talking about. Is there any other descriptive?
She was walking behind me. When she turned, I turned around to get the best look I could and noted as much as I could. And it was the ponytail. She had a jacket on, but I don't remember what color it was. Black shirt and the tan boots.
Okay, so ponytail, black shirt, a jacket, and the tan boots. Okay.
As best as you could tell, what ethnicity?
I believe she was white.
And was, to the best of your ability, is the jacket leather or denim or?
I was trying to note things that that she would still have on to be able to be identified. So I didn't really look at the jacket. I just looked at the shirt and the shoes.
That's all I have, Judge.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know you have somewhere to be, so
I do.
we'll let you get to that.
Thank you.
Judge,
Well, before you, I want to make a proposal, and then I'll hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
Well, go ahead.
we had discussed briefly about having Miss Davis maybe state in order to identify the actual juror.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Davis, that's right. If we could have you stay for just a moment. You're right. Thank you for bringing that up. What I am thinking we should do is have Miss Lou go back to observe the jurors just to see whether or not there is anyone with a brown ponytail, black shirt and tan boots. The jacket may well have been taken off. But sort of first, just see if we even have anyone like that. I can't, I myself don't remember whether or not anyone fits that description here today. I don't know if either side does. So my thought would be, if someone in fact matches that description, we can bring her in and ask questions. And if someone doesn't match that description, then I don't really know what to do. But it would seem to me that black shirt and tan boots would be pretty easy to identify. Of course, hairstyle can be changed, but we'll at least look for a brown ponytail. And if you see anyone with black shirt and tan boots, ask if they have a jacket that's here today.
Okay. Just so I am confirming.
Yes.
Black shirt, tan boots, brown hair,
Possible ponytail.
possible ponytail, possible black jacket.
I don't know that a color of the jacket was described,
Okay, I
so
think
actually let's just leave the jacket part out of it, because I would assume almost everyone has a jacket. But if you see black shirt and tan boots, at least ask the question if they have a jacket here today.
Okay, and if I identify this individual, would you like me to bring them to the courtroom now, or let you know?
Let's go ahead and we'll bring them to the courtroom if they're here.
Okay, would you like me to leave the record running while I'm gone so that you can keep discussing?
Sure.
Okay, and then I will message you with a heads up.
On phone.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I will be back.
I'll tell you in a minute. Okay. Just put it on the back, yeah. Keep all our secrets in the very best.
All right, we have someone who may match that, so we'll rise up real quickly. All right, everyone can go ahead and have a seat. All right, I see a head shaking no. All right, so I'm going to apologize to the juror. We brought you back in here for something which it appears is not related to you. So we're going to have you go back and join. So we'll have you brought back and put with the rest of the jury. All right. Hold on just one second, Ms. Lou. We'll guide you back there.
I'm going in just a second, Judge. And then, Judge, I will leave the record running.
Sure.
And I did just shoot you a message.
So here's what I think we can do next. And Ms. Davis, I fully understand that, sometimes when we overhear snippets of a conversation, it may or may not be what we think it is. But I think in an abundance of caution, when the entire jury comes in, if you can give me some sort of head signal if suddenly you see the person that you were referencing. And if you do, we'll sort of take things from there. Does that sound okay? All right.
Your Honor, could we perhaps have Ms. Davis maybe take note of their juror number?
Sure. Yes. If she can see it from there. I don't know if she'll be able to or not.
Oh.
Are we ready for the whole jury, or would you?
Yeah, so just so you're aware of what we're going to do, we're going to bring in the whole jury in an abundance of caution. If Miss Davis then sees the person that she saw earlier, she'll give a head nod so that we'll be aware of it. And then we'll probably have to take the jury back out so that we know who we're talking about.
Okay.
But I might have you just park them in the hallway till we
Okay.
figure out who we need to speak to.
There is another trial on this floor, so I may not be able to park 18 people in the hallway.
If you can't.
Yes.
Just trying to.
Understood. I am there with you. Okay, I will go ahead and get the full jury now.
All right.
And I will leave the record running.
Okay.
You're right. Bigger problems. But like, you know.
All rise for the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated. All right. All right, Ms. Davis, then you can depart. Ms. Davis shook her head no. For the jurors, just for planning purposes, thank you for your patience. We will be ending about 4:45 today. We're probably going to migrate to ending around that time, but we'll give it a test today. So why don't we bring the witness back onto the stand? All right, and you are already sworn in, so you can have a seat. And whenever you're ready, Mr. Overstreet.
Your Honor, before the break, I had finished my line of
Oh,
questioning.
that's right. That's right. Thank you. All right, so cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Detective Posey.
Hello?
You were transferred from homicide to property crimes?
Yes, I did.
And when did that happen?
December of 2018.
I want to start first with this June 6th call that Ms. Brophy made to you.
Yes,
And this is a call, actually, I think this is a call that you made to her. Is that right?
yes.
And you were following up on some information that you needed from her?
Yes, there was a telephone call on the 5th, which basically is kind of the same. Basically, we had the same conversation. She was having a difficulty in getting an email message to me for the work schedule for Daniel.
All right. During that conversation, was Detective Merrill nearby?
Yes, he was.
Was someone next to you feeding you notes about things to ask her?
No.
All right. During that call, you made statements, inaccurate statements to Ms. Brophy about photographs that you said had been found on in her husband's wallet.
Right.
And she told you that that didn't make any sense to her.
Correct.
And it was during that call that she realized that you couldn't have been talking about Dan's wallet, and that instead you must have been talking about Dan's phone.
Yes.
At some point, it sounded to me, and I could be wrong, like someone had passed you a note or had somehow corrected your incorrect statement that it was in his wallet.
Yeah, that would have been Detective Merrill. We sit next to each other when we were working in homicide, so my desk is right next to his desk. So he overheard the conversation, and
Corrected you.
he was just telling me that it was on the phone.
And you had not really seen any photographs in Dan Brophy's wallet.
No, not of those items that we're talking about.
Okay. Had you seen those items that you were referencing at all?
As I recall, they were on his phone from the download that was done on his phone.
And I guess my question is, why didn't you know that on June 6th if you'd already seen them on the phone?
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Did you
that.
know on June 6th that the photographs that you had already seen lived on Dan Brophy's phone and not in Dan Brophy's wallet?
I believe so. I don't know why I said wallet. It was a mistake. I don't remember why I said that.
Was it a strategic mistake? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Not that I know of.
Were you trying to suggest to Ms. Brophy in a misleading way that some photographs of maybe other women or other people had been found in her husband's wallet?
No.
At the end of your interview with Ms. Brophy, you said that, or you referred her to a tip counselor.
Yeah, at the end of the interview on June 2nd. Mm-hmm.
What's a tip counselor?
They're a person who helps people who are grieving or have experienced a difficult situation. They basically are there to provide support, give them some help in providing like resource information.
Okay. And are they affiliated with PPB or are they separate from PPB?
My understanding is they're separate, but they obviously work in conjunction with us for critical incident type situations.
And before a tip counselor shows up, someone from PPB would typically call and ask one of them to be there?
Yeah,
Okay. And because you work in conjunction, and is it tips or tip? I know I'm
It's-
saying it wrong.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
It could be, I think it's tips, but I don't remember.
Oh, well, we'll both just say it wrong and then we'll figure out later.
I honestly don't interact with them, so I don't know for sure.
But because they work, and you know that they are a resource and provide resources to the people they talk to, is that right?
That's my understanding.
And have you ever reviewed the resources that they provide to the people they speak with?
No.
Are you familiar with a TIPS handbook or manual that the TIPS counselor would provide to
I'll
a
object,
person
Your
like
Honor.
Ms. Brophy?
No.
Oh, wait, okay, hold on a sec. So
I
there's
did not mean to step over the conversation.
so there was an objection. Basis of the objection?
He already answered that he has not reviewed any of our materials, of TIPS materials, and then the next question was, have you reviewed their handbook?
I didn't
The
say
question
reviewed,
was
I
whether
said were
you're
you
familiar with, so I'll allow the question, but go ahead with the answer.
No.
During the June 2nd interview with Ms. Brophy, you asked her whether her husband carried a briefcase or some kind of a bag that he would typically carry.
I think I asked that question, or yeah, that question was asked.
And she told you that Dan Brophy didn't carry a briefcase, but that he always carried a red book bag.
There was a book bag that she mentioned, yes.
What time, again, just remind me because I didn't bring my notes. What time did you arrive on the scene?
I'd have to look at my notes because I don't remember the exact time. I thought it was sometime around 8:30 or 9. I don't remember exactly. It probably was at 9 because I think the call came out at like 8:30 or something like that. So it was somewhere in there.
Took about a half an hour for you to get there,
Yeah,
get
at
assigned
least,
and then
yeah,
get
at least
there.
that, right,
All
yeah.
And by the time you got to the scene, was Public Information Officer Simpson present on the scene?
I believe so,
Okay, and he was there talking to the media,
yes.
and at least one cameraman was present by the time that you had arrived, is that right?
I would say so, yes.
Let's talk about this Glock that was taken from Ms. Brophy, if we can.
Okay.
The Glock that you've shown the jury today has been handled since Ms. Brophy gave that gun to Portland Police for safekeeping, is that right?
That is correct.
The slide has been removed from that gun several times,
Yes, it has.
and the gun has been fired since she provided it to you.
That's my understanding, yes.
At some point, the zip tie was cut and removed.
Apparently, yes.
In August of 2018, were you the person who took that gun to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab?
Yes, yes. I don't remember if I asked them to have it either transferred or I took it myself, but I think I had it transferred.
Okay. But you were the person who took it out of evidence? Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly.
While that gun was in the possession of the State Crime Lab, they took photographs of that firearm's condition, did they not?
I believe that's their protocol. I don't think I've seen those pictures, so I don't know if I've seen their pictures that they took.
Didn't the State Crime Lab send you an entire copy of their report?
I know that they wrote a report. I don't remember seeing pictures that they did.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 243 and ask if you recognize this.
Okay. Okay.
Do you recognize that?
Yeah.
And is that the gun that Ms. Brophy turned over to the Portland Police?
Well, I believe so. I can't really see the serial number on there, but it appears to be the same one with the zip tie.
Okay. And in that photograph, the zip tie has been cut?
Yes,
And in that photograph, the slide and barrel is seated correctly on the frame.
yes,
So at some point before this gun was given to the Oregon State Crime Lab, the slide had been manipulated in some way.
are these the pictures from the state crime lab? I don't know if they were manipulated. They shouldn't have been manipulated before going to the crime lab. They would have done that.
You're saying that doesn't
That the
look.
crime lab would have done that.
You're saying the crime lab would have changed the condition of the gun before they photographed it?
Yes.
And I'm not familiar with guns, and I wasn't really following what you were saying, but is it true that to get that zip tie through the barrel and slide,
Mhm.
that you would need to take the slide and barrel off of the frame?
No.
So you can just pop it through without,
You can open up the action of the gun so that the barrel is open, so that basically the action is open, and then you would be able to slide the zip tie through the barrel and out the other side.
okay, I'm hoping there are people on the jury that are as dumb about guns as I am. Can you explain to us what it means to open the action?
Yeah, so when you want to access the back of the barrel, which is essentially maybe it'd be better
Yeah.
to stand up and
Point
do
on
it.
the big one.
So right here is what we would call the ejection port. It's the back of the barrel. The very back of the barrel is right here. And this is the front of the barrel. So the back of the barrel and the front of the barrel. This little piece right here is the extractor. It removes casings from the gun. Whenever this part right here is pulled back. So these lines right here are designed for gripping, and you pull this whole slide back, which leaves the barrel in place, and basically opens up a hole where the back of the barrel is exposed, so that you could place something here and run it through out the back.
But in the photographs that we saw, and maybe I'm remembering them incorrectly, I thought that in the photograph that was taken from Ms. Brophy's home, that the zip tie went entirely through to the back end of the gun, from the front to the back. Is that incorrect?
That's incorrect.
So it's your testimony that that zip tie only went up to this area that we call the action?
Yes, the ejection port.
Now, there was a question asked of you, and I wanted to clarify what was or wasn't said. Ms. Brophy never told you that she had never touched or handled the Glock, did she?
No, it was, they looked at it and realized that it wasn't something that they were, interested in
That's not my
being a
question,
part
though,
of.
Detective. My question is, did Ms. Brophy ever tell you that she had never touched or handled the Glock?
I don't remember the exact wording that she used. She said that she didn't use the gun.
She said
That's my understanding.
she'd never fired it,
Right,
and she said she'd never loaded it.
that's correct. She said she didn't have any ammunition.
But she didn't tell you that she'd never touched it or handled it.
Well, I would assume that she handled it in some way or another.
Now, this gun and we can take that down, thank you. The gun that Ms. Brophy provided to the Portland Police, she provided for safekeeping.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
So this gun wasn't taken as evidence.
Not at that initial point in time.
Okay. So back on June 2nd, the gun was taken for safekeeping, and that means the Portland Police agrees to store the gun for safety purposes?
Yeah, it's to keep it in a safe place for the person.
And it's true that the Portland Police has regulations about how a gun taken for safekeeping should be processed.
That is my understanding, yes.
And the PPB regulations require that a firearm taken for safekeeping be given, quote, directly to the Property Evidence Division.
I believe it, if that's what it says, that's what it says.
But this firearm was not given directly to the Property Evidence Division, was it?
It stayed at the detective division for a few days.
It was given to you?
It was at the detective division, yeah.
Was it on your desk?
No,
Where was it at the?
it was in our property holding room that we have at the detective division.
At some point, though, you took it out of the property holding room and examined it, did you not?
No.
You never did?
Mm-mm.
Do you remember testifying under oath in this case?
I did. I remember seeing the gun before we put it into the room.
Do you remember testifying under oath in this case that you had opened the case and photographed it when it was back at the detectives division?
Yeah, I remember that.
So for that to occur, you must have taken the gun out of the evidence locker to personally examine it. Is that right?
That is not correct.
The bullets that killed Dan Brophy were 147 grain.
I don't know for sure if that's what they were. That was my estimation of them.
And you estimated that they were 147 grain by the weight of them from the autopsy?
That was, it wasn't, it was from viewing the bullet as far as how it looked.
Okay. And I don't remember whether it was in your testimony, but at some point you determined that there were bullets at J&B, the firearm store,
Yes.
that were, quote, I think your word was comparable to the bullets that killed Dan Brophy.
They were similar as far as the casings. So they were of a similar nature, by the same brand or company that of the casings that were at the crime scene.
But what you saw at J&B were not 147 grain bullets, were they?
I don't remember.
Portland police are each issued their own Glock, is that right?
Yes.
And these guns that you're issued, every now and then you have to go to a range and show that you're still proficient in firing them.
Yes.
And are you responsible for cleaning your own gun?
Yes.
And when you clean your own gun, you use a solvent, is that right?
Yes.
And what's the solvent made of, do you know?
I don't know.
It's something, though, that would dissolve the residue or gunshot particles that are left on the gun?
It helps to remove them. I don't know.
Does it have an odor? What does it smell
Some
like?
do, some don't.
Yeah, does the one you use have an odor?
The one that we use at the bureau now doesn't have an odor.
And after you use something to get whatever the residue is off the gun, do you use like a gun oil to lubricate it?
Typically, a gun oil is used to lubricate, yes.
You testified about this loader that was inside the weapon.
Yes.
And I may have misunderstood, but you weren't suggesting that a person could use the loader without first touching the bullets, were you?
I didn't suggest that, no.
Okay, maybe it was just in the question.
Okay.
To put the bullets in the loader, you would need to touch the bullets.
At some point, you have to touch the bullet, yeah.
You got to get them out of the box and
Right.
either into the magazine or into
Correct.
the loader.
Yes.
In this case, you were the lead detective?
Initially, yes.
Okay. And you did not ask that the shell casings be swabbed for DNA?
No, I did not.
And you've testified previously that you made that decision because, quote, DNA would not exist in that environment?
That was my understanding at the time.
But in August of 2018, there was a time that you met with the prosecutors in this case.
Yes.
And during that August of 2018 meeting, there was actually a discussion about the need to swab these casings for DNA.
I don't remember that, but sure.
Near OCI, in fact, adjoining OCI is a big, or like a, I think it's a 4-story condominium complex. Is
Yes.
that right?
I think it's across the street.
Well, there's one right next to it on
Okay,
Jefferson.
yeah, there is another building next to it, yeah,
And that's 3 or 4 stories.
I think so.
And across the street is a condominium complex.
Yes,
And this condominium complex takes up the whole block, is that right?
it takes up a large portion of the block, yes.
And this one that's across the street is also 3 or 4 stories.
I believe so.
And each one of these condominium complexes, the one on the OCI side and the one across the street, has residential units that look out onto Jefferson.
Yes,
Many of those units have balconies.
I think so.
Okay. And we've heard testimony about the all of the canvassing that was done after this murder. There wasn't a single resident of any of those condominiums who was questioned, is that right, or interviewed?
Not that I know of.
And I think it's kind of behind OCI, but next to OCI is a place called Nara.
Yes.
And what's Nara?
I don't know what it's exactly what the letters are for. It's I'm not familiar with it. I mean, I don't know what the NARA stands for.
Is it the Native American Rehabilitation Center or something like that?
That could be what it is.
Okay. It's a drug treatment center or an alcohol treatment center?
Yes, that makes sense.
And did anyone from the Portland Police interview anybody at NARA?
As I recall, I thought Detective Merrill contacted them or tried to contact them. I don't know if we ever got a response from them. As I recall, and this has been a while, so they either didn't have video information or they didn't want to provide it.
Okay. And in fact, when Detective Merrill talks about canvassing, the extensive canvassing that went on after June 2nd, what he's really saying is that Portland Police went to...
Objection. He's asking what Detective Merrill was really saying.
Well, is what really happened,
All right, sustain the objection and reword it.
yes, is what really happened is that Portland Police went to businesses surrounding OCI to look for videotape.
The canvassing that we did was for video surveillance, yes.
Okay. You prepared some notes as you did this investigation,
Yes,
and those notes were provided to the defense pursuant to a subpoena.
that is my understanding.
Were those notes prepared contemporaneously to the events that they describe?
Can you reword that question?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether, like, if you write in the notes that you interviewed witness A, did you prepare that note at the same time that you were interviewing witness A?
Yes and no. Some of those notes could be that, some may not be.
Was there a time prior to the time that you complied with the subpoena that you sat down and rewrote your notes?
No.
One of the things that you noted was that while you were at OCI, the administration had provided you the names of students who hadn't shown up that day.
Yes.
And as there was some investigation of those students who were missing.
I didn't contact those individuals. My understanding was that they were later contacted.
And were reports prepared as a result of those contacts?
I would assume so.
Did you read them?
I probably read through them at some point. It's been a while.
Okay. But that investigation was primarily just an officer telephoning the student and saying, you weren't there on June 2nd. Why?
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Do you recall any follow-up investigation at all?
I know that they followed up with those students at that time.
It's really important in a murder case to preserve the evidence.
Certainly.
And so certainly as the lead detective, not only are you trying to direct the collection of evidence, but you're trying to preserve it.
Certainly.
And you're trying to preserve it in the state that it was in when it was collected.
Yes.
And a key part of both the collection and preservation of evidence would be to maintain what's called a chain of custody.
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what a chain of custody is?
So a chain of custody is essentially it's a notation to show who took what item and where that item went, and then so on and so forth. So it provides essentially a chain or a list of the people who handled the evidence and or put the evidence in a particular place.
In this chain of custody, it's important to document each, each piece of evidence and every single place that that piece of evidence went.
Yeah.
And that would be difficult to do if you didn't have a record to go back to document each transfer of that piece of evidence.
Well, that's what the property room does. They have that.
Well, for example, there's not a document that shows the movement of the gun that was taken for safekeeping within the detectives division.
No, that's because I'm the one that's in charge of that.
Okay, so we don't know when it moved from Detective Posey's desk into some kind of an evidence locker, or from an evidence locker to Detective Posey's desk.
Mm,
Your Honor, I'm
I
gonna object to
hold the chain
phrasing
of
the
custody at
question.
that point.
Hold on just a minute.
Objecting to the phrasing of the question. Detective Posey has already testified that he did not have the gun at his desk, and the question suggests that the gun was sitting on his desk at some point, and he's already answered that question.
Well, in light of another answer he gave, I'm going to allow the question and you can redirect, but go ahead.
So repeat the question again,
Oh,
please.
no, that's hard.
Sorry.
So there isn't any documentation showing when this weapon was taken out of an evidence locker and moved to your desk or another detective's desk, or notation showing when it left a detective's desk and was put back in the evidence locker.
There would not be, though that didn't happen.
Okay. You did prepare a chain of custody report in this case.
Yes, it did.
And most of the evidence that was seized in this case was seized in the year of 2018, is that right?
Yes.
But the chain of custody document that you prepared wasn't prepared until January 15th of 2020,
I believe that's the case, yes.
a couple of years after the evidence had actually been collected.
Yes.
You testified about interviewing a fellow by the name of Oscar Taylor.
Yes.
And you were aware before that interview that Oscar Taylor had had some sort of a hostile encounter with someone at Potluck in the Park.
That's my understanding.
And the person at Potluck in the Park had reported that Oscar Taylor had threatened him or claimed to have had a weapon.
Yes.
And so that's the information that you took with you into this interview of Oscar Taylor.
Not all of that. Obviously, we had seen somebody who was described as Oscar Taylor leaving the area in reference to that prior to that. But yes, that information was there.
Okay. And when you talked with Oscar Taylor, he told you that this argument with Todd Fredette, is that his name?
Yeah, Fredette.
Fredette. That this had occurred on the loading dock at Potluck in the Park.
Yeah, I believe that's where it was at.
I want to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 40.
Did you say 40?
40.
40?
That would be a state's exhibit.
Oh,
Right.
240. I needed two. I'm
All
sorry.
right, 240.
Have you noticed homeless people or transients
lot.
hanging around
A
there?
lot, yeah, I found.
All right.
Let's look at Exhibit
Hold
233.
on a sec, there's an objection.
I have no idea what this is.
Neither do
All
I.
right, is this not what, is
This
this
is
not?
not what I anticipated it would be.
Okay,
There-
so before we play
This is a
what it
photograph.
is, why don't we make sure you've spoken with your person to make sure that we have the right exhibit?
Oh. Can we look at 233?
Can I look at it first?
Is that safe?
And
It's-
let's
it's
make
been sent to
sure,
you.
let's also make sure the state has seen whatever it is that we're about to play to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about.
Oh, okay. Do you guys have an Exhibit 40?
Yes. I think that's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is. It's
So-
States 40.
States 40?
Sorry.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay, now everybody stay where they are. We're gonna try again. Okay, now you can see States Exhibit 40.
Yes.
Can you orient yourself to where we are?
Yes, this is the intersection of 17th and Jefferson, looking south.
Okay. And as we look across Jefferson, there's a parking lot across the way with a gray minivan in it.
Yes, off to the left.
Okay. And that gray minivan is in the parking lot for Potluck in the Park, is that right?
Yes.
And if we were to head south from the minivan, there would be a loading dock there that goes with Potluck in the Park?
I think so.
Okay. And so when Mr. Taylor described for you the argument that occurred, that he remembered, it happened at this loading dock that was there on Southwest 17th. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Let me show you what's been, maybe just another view of the same thing, what's been marked as Exhibit 233. I believe this is Defense Exhibit 233.
Yeah.
Well, we have now.
All right, so for the tech person, let's make sure before it's displayed that both sides have seen the exhibit, so we know what we're talking about. And I'm sorry I'm referring to you that way, I don't know your name, but let's just make sure that both sides have had a chance to look before we display exhibits. All right, so Exhibit 233.
And this is an aerial view near OCI, is that right?
Yes, it's an aerial view.
Okay, and can you find Potluck in the Park in this aerial view and point it out for the jury?
So my understanding is that this here is where Potluck in the Park is located, is my understanding.
Okay. And the loading dock that was described would be there on the 17th Avenue side?
Yeah, it should be somewhere in here.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. When you interviewed Mr. Taylor, you asked him whether he was at the Oregon Culinary Institute on June 2nd.
I probably asked him that, yes.
And he said, I took Cabernet with Kendall.
I don't remember him saying something like that.
Okay. Are you saying he didn't say that?
I don't remember him saying that. I certainly know that he didn't say that he took it from OCI.
All right. Well, if you don't remember him saying it, how do you remember what he said?
Because I remember the conversation, and I know that he didn't say anything about taking something from Oregon Culinary Institute.
The question, though, was if he'd been at OCI that day. And
I
the
did
answer-
ask him if he was at OCI that day.
Okay. Oscar Taylor also told you that there are lots of crazy guys down there carry guns.
I didn't write that in my report. I don't remember him saying that necessarily. Doesn't mean that he didn't say that.
What you wrote in your report was he just said lots of crazy guys down there.
Yes.
You didn't write in your report that the crazy guys carry guns.
I didn't write that, no.
You were one of the officers who searched Dan Brophy's truck, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Bef- I sent you 2 photographs? Okay. I want to show you what's been marked Defense Exhibit 241.
All right, and have both sides seen this?
Yeah.
All right, so Mr. Breton, thanks. 241, okay.
And ask if you can identify that.
It was a book that was located in Mr. Brophy's truck.
And now I want to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 242.
Has the state seen it?
Yeah.
All right, so unless you speak up, I'll assume you've seen it. All right, go ahead.
And can you identify that?
It was one of the papers that was in the truck.
Okay, and looking at the content of that paperwork, does that appear to be some sort of a student evaluation or some sort of an employee appraisal? Can you go back to the top, Mr. Breton, so that he can see?
Your Honor, if we could have this just published to Detective Posey to see if he can even identify it before it's published to the jury.
Do
Just
you have the?
identified it.
Well, I said it was a paper that was in the.
It's a paper
I
with,
understand that, but the contents of it may not be admissible, and we may have a relevance objection, and
All right,
especially if he doesn't have any
it's
personal
Not
knowledge.
being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, Your Honor.
Well, first of all, I don't even know what's in it. So before we start arguing about whether or not it's admissible, I think what we'll need to do is have the jury step out for a moment so that I can review the document and see what may or may not be objected to.
Okay, would you like to leave the record running, Judge?
Yes, please.
Okay, leave the record running. All right, to the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated. And before we get into an argument about this exhibit, and just a couple of things procedurally. When I ask the state if they've seen the exhibit, I assume they'll bring up a concern if, and before it being published up there, if there is going to be a concern, if the state hasn't seen the exhibit yet, then I don't want it published up there until a concern can be brought to my attention. On the same token, though, for defense, do you not have hard copies of these items that can be given to witnesses for them to look at? I'm just asking, do you
Your Honor,
or do
this
you
is a
not?
photograph. No, I don't have
Okay,
a
all
hard
right.
copy of this photograph.
Okay,
But it was, I will tell the court that these were sent to counsel ahead of this afternoon's hearing, and I confirmed with counsel before we began questioning that they had seen what I was about to show.
all right. So let's first, I guess the first thing then is to figure out whether or not there's an objection. I can tell you it's still difficult for me to see, but I can see it.
Well, I think, one, Your Honor, I'd like, just because we've seen it doesn't mean I know what they're attempting to offer it for. And so I think what I would ask is that the questions be asked of Detective Posey just outside the presence of the jury to see if we have an objection to it.
Okay, all right. That's fine. Yeah, why don't we go ahead then with the questions?
All right. You previously testified that you recognized this as a document that you had located in Dan Brophy's truck when you searched it.
yes.
And this document has some of what appear to be Dan Brophy's notes on the bottom of the document. Is that right?
I don't know if those are his notes. I don't know whose notes those are.
Do you recall questioning witnesses about this particular document?
I don't remember doing that.
Do you recall questioning Nathaniel Stillwater about some documents in Dan Brophy's truck that involved his desire to change?
I don't at this point in time, I don't remember, I don't have a recollection of that. I don't.
My question, I guess, then is Dan Brophy's notes that include things like slow down and change, they were attached to his student evaluation as opposed to this other book that we've talked about, the Michael Pollan book about change.
Well, I can't speak to if it's a student evaluation, and I don't know if
Well, can we
Daniel
look
wrote
back
that.
at the content and then maybe you could?
I don't know who, it doesn't say who wrote that, though. It doesn't say who it's for. I don't know.
And your testimony is that you've never used this or referenced this?
I don't remember using this in talking to Nathaniel.
Okay.
Right off the top, Judge, it's clearly not authenticated by any means. And there's certainly a relevancy objection and clearly a hearsay objection.
All right, so
I probably have more, but I just.
okay, so let's just start with relevance. What is the relevance of this document? Which appears, just so the record's clear, it has a bullet point typed portion at the top or half of the page, and then the lower half seems to be handwritten notes that are in a different direction. So what is the relevance of this?
Well, I think that one of the witnesses we're going to talk to about this same document will be Tom Bethel. We believe that what happened just before this is that, because we've heard all about Mr. Brophy's evaluation and how well loved he was, but we were going to talk to Tom Bethel about the fact that this was a document that was given to Dan Brophy, that it is a student evaluation, and that the notes that are on there are Dan Brophy's notes. There were suggestions in interviews of witnesses that in fact this had that it might have been more personal as opposed to professional, the commentary regarding change. And the handwritten notes that are here, because they're affixed to a student evaluation as opposed to just standalone notes, I think it's much more likely, and the more reasonable inference is that those notes relate to the student evaluation as opposed to something personal.
All right, so let's, a couple of hurdles to jump over, I guess. This witness has not been able to indicate what this document is or who wrote it or what its purpose is. So at least at this stage, I would sustain the state's objection, foundationally, if nothing else. Maybe it can be established with another witness, but it doesn't seem like this witness. And I'm not ruling on the other state's objections at this point. We'll see whether or not those objections still exist after this other witness testifies. But for now, I'm sustaining the objection.
Here, let me just offer one other basic point of relevance. This is the lead detective in the case who's looking at the contents of the victim's car. The fact that he didn't even review or ascertain what might have been going on with respect to this document is itself relevant.
Well, I think you can certainly ask him without the need to show it. I forget what the exhibit is. I guess it's exhibit number 242. I think you've already asked that it was a paper found in the truck. Without showing it, I think you can ask him if he reviewed it or didn't review it, or what he may have done with it or not done with it. And then with a later witness, if you can establish some of these other foundational requirements, the document itself may come in. So I'll allow you to ask questions about what he did with it, but I'm not allowing the document in right now. With that, why don't we bring the jury back?
Okay, would you like me to leave the record running?
Sure.
Okay. I will go ahead and get the jury now.
Your Honor, I think what would be really helpful to prevent these types of situations coming up in the future is if we were provided with an exhibit list we could track along with. I mean, I think that would probably prevent a lot of these types of issues.
That's something defense can provide.
Today, we provided the documents that we pulled out as we were preparing for this examination, and we provided them in advance. And I had been
understand.
told that there
mean,
wasn't a problem.
But, and I'm not trying to start an argument between the sides. I guess I'm just asking the simple question of whether or not defense can provide, I know the state has a list of anticipated exhibits. Doesn't have to be, you know, if the numbers change or exhibits change, so
You know,
be it.
I think that we have, as time has gone on, we've tried to provide them in advance, exhibits that we intend to use. As the court is aware, many of these exhibits are exhibits that we plan to show a witness in impeachment or for other purposes. I don't think we should be put in a position where we have to provide advance notice of impeachment, but I know that Ms. Weinmiller has been working very hard for the last several weeks to try to get the state exhibits that we know we're going to use.
Okay, well, here's what we'll do. And
With lists.
I understand the argument about the impeachment issue. What I would suggest to try to avoid these issues is, you know, if before something gets put up on the screen, if the state thinks there may well be an objection, bring it to my attention. We can always have the jury step out like we did with this one and sort of see where we are. But I think that's probably the best way we can do it for now.
Okay, Judge, I will go ahead and get the jurors now, but I will still leave the record running.
When you're saying like at lunch or in the morning, because I don't. Like,
Send it to all three of you.
I didn't know you were gonna.
He won't.
The time will come for that.
All right, everyone can be seated. I did sustain the objection, so Ms. Maxfield, if you can ask your next question.
Yes. Detective Posey, you were one of the people who searched Dan Brophy's truck.
Yes,
Were you also photographing evidence as you saw it?
yes,
Did you use your phone or something for that?
I believe so.
So photographs that were taken of Dan Brophy's trucks were most likely photographs that were taken by you.
Yes,
Several of the documents, or several of the items that you found in Dan Brophy's truck were documents.
yes,
Many of those documents had Mr. Brophy's handwriting on them. Or handwriting. Many of
had
those
handwriting
documents
on them,
had
yes.
handwriting.
yes.
And did you ever take any steps to determine whose handwriting that was?
Not on those items.
Okay. Did you even bother to read the documents that you found in the truck?
At the time we looked at them, certainly I looked through them.
Well, did you read them or not?
Sure, I read them.
And some of the documents that were in the truck included student evaluations?
There was a crate, I believe, had some evaluation forms.
Did you read them?
No.
Anything else? Have nothing further, thank you.
All right, redirect.
Yes, thank you, Judge. Detective Posey, you were just asked about photographs of Mr. Brophy's truck, the interior of the truck, that those would be yours.
Yes,
I want to clarify that. Are you speaking about the photographs that were taken while that truck was in storage?
yes.
Okay, so the scene photographs of Daniel Brophy's truck would not be yours, or they would?
They would not be.
Okay, so there are other photographs of this pickup truck that are not yours, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Ms. Maxfield asked you about, she asked you to describe chain of custody, and she referenced a document. Did you see that document that she was referencing?
Are we talking about the report that I wrote? Is that the document we're talking about? There was a report that was written. I wrote that report. It was at the request of counsel in order to document the where things went.
Okay, just want to make sure we're talking about two different things here, right? There's a chain of custody form or something that usually travels with an item, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And then this report that Ms. Maxfield asked you about was you reporting about a chain of custody portion.
Yes, that's correct.
So when she says this was prepared on January 20th, 2020, she's talking about the report?
I wrote a report which would have been in 2020.
Okay.
That's not the chain of custody report that comes from the Property Evidence Division.
Right. Just want to be clear because you're saying this chain of custody report is not what was being referenced when Ms. Maxfield was talking to you.
Right.
Just your report about the chain of custody.
Yes.
Okay. On that note, you were provided this fire. You already testified on direct, and I believe again on cross, that you were given this firearm from Detectives Broughton and Beniga that was collected from Miss Brophy's home,
Yes.
and that was delivered to you in the Detectives Division.
Yes.
Does the Detectives Division have a secure, locked portion of that floor in order to store evidence?
Yes.
Now, you and Miss Maxfield kind of went round and round on whether this gun was at your desk or not, and when you examined it. I hope to clear that up for everyone. Did you have that gun at your desk?
No.
Okay. You referenced examining that firearm at some point. Was that done before you put it into that property division?
Yes.
Okay. So you get the gun, you examine it, you close it up, you put it in that locked portion of the facility,
Yes.
and then at some point in the coming days, it's delivered from that secure facility to the actual property room?
Yes.
Is that proper procedure, Detective?
Yes.
And just on that note, Ms. Maxfield chose the term taken when she said that the Glock was collected from Miss Brophy, that it was taken from her. Can you clarify that? Was the gun taken from her?
The gun was not taken from her. She gave it to Detective Beniga and requested that it be taken.
Okay. In your interactions in that planning phase of going back to Miss Brophy's house in order to secure and collect the firearm, was it your understanding that Miss Brophy actually wanted you to have that firearm
Yes.
and to have it for safekeeping?
Essentially, she did not want the firearm anymore, and she surrendered it to us.
Okay. And that was done under the policy of the Portland Police Bureau, which has been referred to as safekeeping?
Correct.
At any time in the following months leading up to September 5th, 2018, did Miss Brophy ever contact you and request her firearm be returned?
No.
Did she have all of your information once you guys got the email clarified? Did she have all of your correct information?
Yes.
Now, just briefly on these insurance cards, Ms. Maxfield referred to them as photos out of Mr. Brophy's wallet. I believe your testimony was actually that these were photographs that were located on a cell phone, not of photographs, but of insurance cards. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were pictures of insurance cards.
Okay, not pictures of people.
No.
When you spoke with Ms. Brophy about that, you were not relaying to her that these were pictures of people, of women in Mr. Brophy's wallet?
No.
Okay. When she made the comment, something about, oh gosh, I hope Dan didn't have a second life or a double life or something like that. I can't quite remember the exact term. Did you not dispel of that immediately, that that's not what you were trying to say or what you were
Yeah,
believed?
that's correct.
Show photo 113. Sorry, I know your computer's closed. Detective, there's some questions on cross about how a zip tie is inserted. I know you handled that firearm this morning, State's Exhibit 26, and it seemed fairly clear that how the zip tie was inserted, but I want you to look at how it was zip tied. This gun was zip tied back when it was collected. The way you described a zip tie going through the slide and barrel on cross, is that the same thing that you're seeing here? Meaning, is that zip tie going through to the end of the barrel and then coming out through the ejection port?
Yes.
And I know you were showed a photograph of after the zip tie was cut, but you yourself had no part in cutting this zip tie. Is that correct?
No.
Okay. You don't know who actually did it or when, because that was after you had relinquished it to the property room?
Correct.
So how it was handled after that, it would be those people that would have that knowledge, not you?
Correct.
Okay. Now, Ms. Maxfield talked to you about cleaning a gun. And maybe cleaning a gun is a bit of a misnomer, but what are you actually cleaning when you clean a gun?
Well, you're cleaning the metal and removing deposits that would have been there from shooting the gun.
Okay. It's one of the primary pieces that you're cleaning, the actual interior of the barrel.
Yes, that is an item that is cleaned.
Why do you need the barrel clean?
Soot and contaminants can build up, and so the idea is to keep that clean so that everything operates properly.
Besides, and to do that, do you have to scrub the barrel, sometimes using a wire brush?
Yes.
Besides the scrubbing of the barrel to ensure there's no soot or buildup inside of it, besides generally brushing and wiping down the remainder of the gun parts, is there really any necessary cleaning that's required beyond that to have the gun function?
No.
And then after it's cleaned, wiped down, let's say, a little bit of oil on the slide where it connects with the lower frame. Is that about all that's required?
Technically, all that's required is oil. If you use plenty of oil, typically a gun of this type, a semi-automatic handgun, will keep firing and keep operating.
So, what I'm trying to get at here, Detective, is that if you clean your gun, say appropriately, whether it's to military grade or police grade, but just generally cleaning the gun so that it's a serviceable weapon, are you getting in all of the nooks and crannies that potential black powder has been exposed to?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you as a police officer.
Me personally, I clean everything on the gun to make sure, because it allows me to inspect the gun as well as clean the gun. So, and so that's just, I've always been taught to clean all of the parts of the gun.
You've been trained on that?
Yeah.
And you've been trained on how to clean the interior parts as well?
Yes.
Is that much more extensive than that basic cleaning that I just described about the slide and barrel?
Yeah, it could be.
Now, Ms. Maxfield asked you about handling of some of the evidence, including the shells that were collected from the scene. And this mention of possible DNA sometime in the future, some discussion about it. At the time, though, on June 2nd, 2018, were you aware that DNA was really a possibility to be collected from spent shell casings?
My understanding was not available at that point in time, and I did not believe that the state crime lab was testing for that they actually would do that.
Okay. So at that time, did you decide to go with a different analysis that may or may not have any results?
Yes.
And what was that?
I asked for the shell casings to be fumed or checked for fingerprints.
Okay. Detective, if you thought that DNA or some other, any testing process was available that you thought might result in identifying a suspect in a homicide, would you not have used that?
I would have used that. And if I can just mention on that, I did ask after the casings had been tested and worked on, I asked to see if that was still a possibility to do. But I was told that that wouldn't be available anymore.
Because the casings had already been tested on another method?
Yes.
And were you also aware that it would work vice versa too? If you would have swabbed these casings for some reason for DNA, that then you would no longer be able to test for fingerprints?
That is correct.
I have no further questions.
Be excused, or will there be a recall
He can be excused for the state, Your Honor.
for defense?
Still under subpoena for us, and I
Okay.
can't promise we're gonna call him back, but I'd like to keep the
Sure,
subpoena in place.
absolutely. That's fine. All right, Detective Posey, you can step down for today. And who's the state's next witness?
The
Ms.
state
Brown?
will call Steve Santos.
Steve Santos? Okay.
Lost my exhibits.
Don't publish. Discussion, but
All right, Mr. Santos, we're going to have you come up here and step into the witness box, but don't have a seat just yet. My clerk will give you an oath. Actually, if you can stay standing, we're going to have you raise your hand, and my clerk will give you an oath.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, then you may be seated. And you can remove your mask. And then because we're being recorded, I will ask you to please state and spell your first and last name.
First name,
And last, please.
Steven. middle initial C, last name Santos.
All right. And Mr. Santos, there is water there if you want it.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. And once you've had a chance, the state can inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Santos. Let's start with how you are currently employed.
I own a brokerage insurance company by the name of MERS Insurance Services. That's a DBA. The technical name is the Santos Agency. Thank you.
All right, and can you tell the jury, sort of walk us through what it is you do, and then also your background, how you got into that field and where you've been in the field over time?
Perfect. So I began in the industry in 1997 as an agent. And at that time, I was focused on long-term care insurance. And then it progressed over into a property and casualty agency where I was helping the clients of that agency with health insurance, life insurance, long-term care. And then I was recruited over to the MERS agency, which is a longtime brokerage firm in the Portland area since 1958, and helping brokers, kind of like a wholesaler, if you will, helping brokers and agents get to independent products to help their clients. So sort of the middle person, if you will. And I started there at the MERS agency at October 1st, 2001. And at first I was focused primarily in long-term care insurance, helping our brokers with their clients. And then it progressed into becoming an expert in life insurance and helping disability income insurance. And then we started to offer more concierge level services in reviews with our financial planners and insurance agents with their clients. And that started around 2008. And then that steadily progressed into more and more advanced cases and helping financial planners. And during that time, to align myself more so with serving our financial planners, I started my extra education at the American College to get my Master's of Financial Services, which I'm one class short. So that was really good because I was able to kind of see their perspective from their side, working with their clients, and also helped me in making right recommendations based upon budget and other things that were going on in their clients' lives. And then that progressed into last year. July 1st is when I took over the MERS agency and changed the DBA to MERS Insurance Services.
And can you explain a little bit about the different types of sort of insurance sales and the difference between it being an insurance agent and then how that sort of developed from you with the financial piece in terms of who you're talking to or what you can advise or discuss?
Okay. So, when I had a lot of work with the end consumer first in my career, and then that transitioned over, which is a good skill set to have, as I was then transitioned over to helping financial planners, agents, and the like with their clients out in the field. So now, as we might know, not all of us can be experts in everything. And so a financial planner spends a lot of their time with a plan and assets under management, understanding how to invest those assets. And that takes a lot of time. So they might not necessarily be experts on the insurance side, and that's where I come in. So they'll partner with me. I'll learn about their client, what the objectives are, and then make recommendations based upon that. So that's kind of progressed to where that's what I do a lot as well, to kind of distinguish our services to other brokerage general agencies. That's our technical name. where it's primarily processing business. Agent gives us application, we go through the underwriting process, so we process that business. And so I extend more services with our clients to work with their clients as well.
All right. And you talked a lot about what you do. Have you ever testified before as an expert?
In a court, no.
And I suppose I should clarify, have you testified in other types of hearings as an expert?
Not in a hearing, no.
All right. And in this particular case, in what capacity are you testifying? Have you been paid to be here today?
I have not been paid, no.
All right. Were you contacted by our office in the recent few months
Yes,
to review some documents in this case?
yes.
Not very long ago, would that be fair to say?
Not very long ago.
All right.
That would be fair.
And as part of that contact, were you provided with a series of policies to review?
Yes, I was visited by Sean and brought over a USB, and I was able to get all the policies to review. And then subsequently after that, I get a call saying that I needed to have a written listing of all of those in one day. And so that was my first rough draft, which I was hoping to have more time to be able to put something through because I didn't have everything right at that point. And so I documented during the document that I wasn't sure about some of the policies in force at the time of Mr. Brophy's death. So I wanted to research that. And so in the process of researching that, I actually, the three that were the most problematic were the Mutual of Omaha policies, which I tried to get to legal, to get answers, couldn't get them. So then I met with another expert witness, Robert Azor, and he was able to provide to me a detailed account of the banking. So what I wanted to make sure to have today was the exact policies that were in force at the time of Mr. Brophy's death. And so that's what we have today, is what I am confident that we have at that time by reconciliation of bank statements and what I see documented in the subpoenaed records that I read through from the carriers.
All right. And so that first piece you're talking about, you wrote an initial summary.
I did
And then you've since updated that summary.
5 times.
Okay. And so you provided that, and I'm going to hand you what I've marked as States Exhibit 69. And can you just flip through that briefly and confirm if that's the final version that you have sent?
So it doesn't have the Forrester's
Let me hand you
illustration.
a secondary piece.
Thank you. So this would be the one that is, yes, it has all the first 5 pages were the ones that we can focus on, but then the rest were documentations of what page on the PDF that I found it, etc. But the summary is the first 5, including the snippet of the Forrester's policy.
Is this all part of 69?
Yeah, I just marked this one as A, and that's just 69.
Okay, we don't have a marked 69. Got an email with 2 parts.
Yeah, this is part 2, and that's part 1. Like there's one PDF. I just stapled them separately, all together.
I'm just trying to figure out which one's which.
Oh, this one's the shorter one.
Yeah, they don't really have separate. One says final visual,
Yeah, that is 69.
and that one says final visual.
Oh, that must be how it came through to you.
Yeah.
Can you scroll down in one of them?
It looks like it's 7 pages.
Yeah, they both do. That's weird.
Attorneys, does it make sense to take a short break to compare and contrast exhibits or not?
Yes.
I think it might, Your Honor.
Do this, why don't we take our afternoon break early? Since we plan on ending at 4:45 anyways, why don't we be back on the record at roughly 3:30?
Thank you.
Off record, I'll mute us for WebEx. All rise. All rise.
All right, please be seated. And if you're ready to continue.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Santos, right before we took our break, I had handed you one document and then I handed you a second. I have now labeled those as 69A and 69B. And have you looked through those, and are those the two documents that you provided or created?
Correct.
All right. And so we were talking just before I showed you those about that you'd done a first revision and then created this second, or the documents that are in front of you there. Both 69A and 69B start with the same color-coded chart. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so in your updated assessment of the life insurance policies, my understanding is that this chart helps color code sort of the difference between policies that you know are in force, policies that are being paid not out of the Brophy bank account, and then which are in green, sorry, policies in force that are in blue, additional policies in green that are not being paid for out of the Brophy's financials, and then policies in gray that are terminated previous to the death of Dan Brophy.
That's correct.
And so are in large part the gray policies, part of the policies, and you mentioned already Mutual of Omaha specifically, that were unsure before you had the time to reconcile everything.
Yeah, when we had the opportunity to look at the bank account and then correlate the premiums from the bank account to this, and then I was able to dive more into the subpoena documents from Mutual of Omaha. It was clear that, you know, one of them, one of the normal life insurance policies was terminated and then there was another one, and then there was an accidental death one as well, and that one went away. So there's only one left on the accidental death at the end.
And we'll talk a little bit when we get to Mutual of Omaha specifically about the policies themselves. But was part of the confusion in the documents what's referred to as a death claim
That's
that was
correct.
made?
Yeah, so when you look through the communication with the customer reps or the people working behind the scenes at the insurance carrier, they document, outline the communication of what's going on with an owner of a policy and then a death claim. And I think what was happening was the one policy that was in force, the death claim had come in, and they probably just then documented all the rest of them, but they weren't in force.
All right, and so the color coding of the chart in both these exhibits sort of clarifies where things stand now.
That's correct.
Okay. Before we dive into both of those exhibits in specifics, can you talk to us a little bit about life insurance policies in general, and specifically start with what are the different types of life insurance policies that exist?
Yeah, I think that's very relevant to going through these so that we kind of have a background of what's going on. And it gives you a perspective of the potential death benefit early and later, and what potentially could be happening with premiums early and later. So if we start with term life insurance, think of that as renting a home. You have a protection for a certain period of time. And that time might be a term that you choose 10-year, 15-year, 20-year. Those premiums are locked in for that time period. After that time period is up, it goes to what's called a guarantee renewable period. Most people, in my experience in our business, will renew at that point or possibly drop the policy. And the reason for that is because when you go to a guarantee renewable state, you're paying that new premium at your new attained age. And then you continue to do that. So as you're younger, that might not be as much, that might not be as much hit on your budget. But as time goes on and you get older, that can become significant. And so again, to summarize, term length, you have a term, If it's a 10-year term, you have a set premium for that duration. And then after that, it goes to guaranteed renewable. The carriers have a higher price at that point because there's more of a risk that those that might not be as healthy are going to keep the policies and utilize them earlier than what would the actual standards would be. So that's guaranteed renewable. And then you also have in the world of term, we'll save that for a premium. So then you have permanent policies. Permanent policies are policies that extend for your lifetime, or they should. So there are two different policies genres in this analysis for permanent. There's one by Forsters, which that policy is what we call a current assumption universal life. Okay? So there are guarantees in it. One of the guarantees is that they can't charge an interest rate less than 3%. The original illustration that we'll see here in a little bit is 5.25-ish, but we'll get there. So what it's saying is, based upon the interest rate, and the other factor that we have to consider are the mortality charges that are being charged to the policy. So carriers file with the states with two sets of rates. One set is the current, what they're charging now, and the other is guaranteed, which are higher. And during the duration of that policy, they can move to both. But to be fair, most carriers have not moved from their current charges because mortality has gotten better over the years. But this has a 3%. So that's a current assumption. So it's like saying, what premium will enable this policy to last the test of time? And so that's called a planned premium. It's not a guarantee premium. So if we start with an interest rate and then over the next 5 years, the carrier lowers those interest rates, that changes the scope of that illustration. So the only way I would know right now the health of that policy would be to do a new enforced ledger, which I wasn't able to do. So that's kind of a nutshell on current assumption UL. And that was a dominant product back in the 80s. They're still around now. And it's not a bad thing, but we'll talk about more of what that looks like down the road when we look at the actual illustration. Then the other genre that we're looking at is called a no-lapse guarantee. Think about that as a term for life. So you pay a premium, it's a guaranteed premium, and that policy is there for the lifetime. You don't have to worry about it unless you don't pay your premium on time. So because of what are called the internal shadow accounts in the policy, those premiums have to be paid on time. So, I mean, right now, all indications that the policy with Americo has been paid on time, in good standing, but that's a no lapse guarantee. Pay a premium, get a benefit, and it's guaranteed. I think this one 2054. So good long time, very stable product. So those are the two in this, and then there's term, and then specifically there's one left of an accidental death. So a term policy with an accidental death only means that the only way that can be paid out is through an accidental death. It couldn't be paid out for health reasons. So if I were to pass away due to a heart attack, for example, that policy would not pay out. Okay.
All right. And in looking at different policies overall, can premiums go up and down over time?
Yeah, as I was mentioning on the term side, when you get to the end of a term, it's going to go to the guarantee renewable. And so as time goes on, those premiums, if you stay in that lane, if you will, and you don't re-underwrite for a new policy, then those term prices are going to go up. And they're going to go up substantially, especially when you get into your mid 60s to 70s and onward. I would say in the 80s, it would be really tough. Like the premiums are very high. So most of the time when I've seen that, somebody keeping that, it's typically, they're paying, could be $500, $600, $700, $800 a month, and they're keeping it because they can, and they want the death benefit. But it would be much better for them to requalify.
And then what about, generally speaking, death benefits? Can those go up with policies over time?
So when we look at the policies here, there is one policy that can go up, and that's the forester's policy. The current assumption policy can go up. And so based upon that plan premium, and what it does, you'll see a note there that based upon the original illustration on that set interest rate, because when you do an illustration, you have to use an interest rate, but that can change. It's not, policies don't act linearly when you're using a current assumption interest rate. But when I looked at and we'll look at it, but when I look at the illustration at age 90, it gets to the highest at $91,000 death benefit. So it starts off at $40,000. But that would be the highest. And then when it does is it'll taper, and then it actually comes down after that based upon the 5% hypothetical.
So on that particular policy, if you live past 91, and depending on how much farther past that, your death benefit's going to go way down, potentially back to where it was when you started.
Well, that's correct. But the other factor is, and I've done a lot of analysis on that, is when a policy doesn't perform, a current assumption policy doesn't perform, and you have a situation where the interest rates come down, which they have over the past 20 years, and you've planned something at a certain interest rate to get you there, but now that interest rate is lower substantially over time, you need more of a premium. So there are cases when you tell somebody, especially when you get out in the 70s, that you might have to pay more premium. Or, and I'm not saying it would happen here, I'd have to look at the enforced ledger, but there's potential of lapsing if that sustained interest rate were to last a long time. So the one that we're looking at here with the original illustration is built upon a certain interest rate. I got to get the exact amount. 5.75.
All right. So I think what's going to be helpful now is if we turn to each of the policies and kind of go through them and what they are, what that means, and then with each one, we'll talk about kind of what you noted within the documents.
Okay.
So why don't you just start by telling us which one, you go in the order that makes sense to you.
Why don't we start from top to bottom?
Sounds great.
Yeah. Are we gonna?
Yeah, and do they have any objection to putting it up? Okay, yep. All right, and so this will be, I guess it's the front of both 69A and 69B.
Perfect. Am I allowed to point? Is that?
Uh-huh, please, yep, and you can extend that pointer, there
Got
you
it.
go.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so you'll see the first one at the top, Fidelity Guaranteed Life. It's a 10-year term. So after the 10 years, and the premiums have been going up, but at younger ages, they don't go up substantially. The last rate is right now that was being paid prior to death was $103.19 a month. So again, you have a term, it's $100,000. There's no accidental death, so that you can pass away for whatever reason, except for the exclusions that are in the policy, then $100,000 would be paid out. Then you have the forester's policy, and I have, when we get to it, we'll go over the illustration. But this is the current assumption, and this is where the death benefit can go up over time. You have a $40,000 that you start with, and as I mentioned, just kind of as a highlight, under the 5.75%, the illustration will show at age 90, $91,000 death benefit and change. And then after that, it'll actually taper down and go down back to 40,000. It's a plan premium. That premium is not guaranteed. There is a guaranteed part of the illustration, which I'll show you. And so, which every carrier has to show. And right now, to be fair to the policy, it's never hit guarantees. So what I don't know is where that interest rate is fallen over the past several years. Then we have the Americo, that's the no lapse guarantee. That's where you have $100,000 not going to increase. That's a steady amount. And then you have the premium at $265.50, and that's a guarantee premium the whole time. The key though is this was something that came as a shock to many agents over time. Is when you buy, this was a product that came out in the wake of the current assumption UL. Because of the current assumption UL being written back in the 80s at such high interest rates, the policies weren't performing well. So the carriers came out with the no lapse guarantee to be able to stabilize that environment. The thing that people didn't realize is that that policy has to be paid on time. If it doesn't, it could affect the guarantees. And so I did not see that in this policy. So it's a guaranteed premium over time, 100,000. Then you have the Mutual of Omaha, accidental death. The way I look at that policy, it's kind of on a group contract. And so it's what you call a guaranteed renewable premium, where the premium's going to remain the same unless the carrier files for a new rate increase. In this case, Mutual of Omaha, which is a really good carrier. I wouldn't expect that to happen a lot, but it could happen. And then that goes to age 80, which then the policy is no longer, but the rates can change. Again, stable company, stable product. It will only be paid out based upon an accidental death. All right. That's $67.60 a month. And then we have the one that was in 2016 purchased, an American Amicable Life 10-year term to 95. The 95 means it's after you get through the 10-year term, then you can continue with it up to 95 and still pay that guaranteed renewable premium. But as I mentioned, as time goes on, that could be a pretty large number as time goes on for your age. And that's to 1902. And all of these we did reconcile off of the bank documents.
And then, all right. And I'll go back through that with a few questions, but you talked just now about the premiums. And so in that total column, what are those two columns here, which are coming from the benefits columns that are combined into one big one there, and then the premium column?
Okay, perfect, thank you. So first, the death benefit, the total death benefit, including the accidental death, would be about $715,000. And that's an appropriate amount of death benefit. I don't see that being excessive for them. But what caused me concern was the monthly premiums. So you have an $812 a month premium that you're paying. And I kind of used an anchor point, because my next page, I kind of do a sample, what if I was in 2016, they came to me to look at what they might want to do with the amount of money that they were spending. And so I looked at the 2016 application, I looked at what the salary was listed, and that was the $60,000. And so then I said, okay, at a 20% tax rate, 80% of 60,000 is about $48,000. So I asked myself, what is the percentage of that expense per my net income? And so that would be 20% of that would be of my net income.
And so in other words, at a salary of about $60,000 a year, if you're paying $812.38 a month in insurance premiums, you are spending about 20% of your income on insurance premiums.
60,000 was the gross.
Yeah. sorry, 60,000 as the gross, 48,000 as your net
Yep.
income. You're spending 20% of your net income.
And so you look at the applications, and they're going to have different salaries on them. And so the one I anchored in was the 2016 application.
And to be clear, the policies we are talking about that we've just gone through are only policies that are on Dan Brophy's life.
Correct.
All right, and so then what do we have here in the green?
So these are going to be group policies through the union, and it's not something that would come out of the bank. It would come out of payroll. So I wasn't able to verify that, so I didn't want to include them in that calculation. But the way so I just put what those death benefits were, and then I don't know what the premiums were at that time either, but just unsure what was actually there with the union.
And so to be clear, the two policies in green, Lincoln Financial and Life Map Amendment, are both policies that are on Dan's life, but through his employer.
Yeah, there was, I think there's some additions that could have added Nancy, but I didn't pay a particular attention to that.
Okay. And so the reason they're not in blue is because they aren't actually paying out of their bank accounts, perhaps out of payroll, but not out of their bank accounts for
That's
either
correct.
of those.
That's correct.
Okay.
I didn't believe it was material in, that the actual death benefits that were available at the time.
Okay. And then let's talk about the 3 Mutual of Omaha policies in gray. I know you kind of covered it, but now that we're looking at those, if you can sort of summarize what you saw here.
Yeah. So you have a 20-year term that was taken out on May 1, 2012, and that was $150,000. That was a $150,000 death benefit. I do not believe there's an accidental death, so that would have been incorrect. And then $200 were the premiums. That was terminated. This policy was started, and then that was terminated on 7/1 of 2014. So you had 2 policies directly in a row that were terminated. And then there was also the third one, which was another accidental death, and that was terminated on 2014.
And so for Mutual of Omaha, we saw back on the first page that there is an active Mutual of Omaha policy. And so essentially those have sort of replaced each other over time. And we already covered it, but just to kind of go back to it, on your initial review of the documents, it wasn't super clear. Would that be fair to say exactly what was happening because of the death claim that was entered for each of those?
Yeah, it was, when you go through a 200-page PDF and you're looking through all of the notes in it, it was very helpful then to reconcile with Robert Azor on the actual bank accounts, because then you can anchor on the bank accounts and what was coming out as premium, and then go back to those policies and really link, okay, this is when it was terminated, and then there was one accidental death that was actually still in effect at that time.
All right. And you can have a seat. I think what will be helpful next is if we go through kind of each of these policies again and talk about some of the things that you noted about them. And I have some questions if that works.
Okay.
And so if you'll look at what I marked as 69B, which is what I'll go through in roughly order. So if we are talking about, and when I said I was going to go in order, I'm now going to go out of that. So first we have the forester's policy, and we'll put it up on the screen next to you as well. We have this chart here, and then it jumps a page before we talk about the actual policy there and some of your notes. So specifically on this policy, you mentioned that there is, in your review, that there's it's a $40,000 death benefit, but then you have notations regarding a loan and then also regarding an accidental death benefit. Can you explain those two things?
Yeah, the accidental death benefit won't pay because it's riding as a fare paying passenger only. The death benefit, there was a small loan on it. So when you have a loan on a policy, at the statement I looked at, you take your death benefit and you reduce it by the loan at death. So the company has to be paid back that loan. And then you get your net death benefit is the death benefit minus the loan.
And what is the procedure or reason or ability for someone to take a loan on an insurance policy? Can every insurance policy, can you take a loan on that, or what does that look like?
Not every policy, a term you can't take a loan on. The no lapse guarantee, you wouldn't be able to take a loan on, but a current assumption is building cash. And so there is a potential of taking a loan out. Now that affects the policy. This is a small loan, so I wouldn't expect it to affect the policy, but down the road, when you take a loan out of it, then you have less unencumbered money to pay mortality costs in the policy.
All right. And can you explain a little bit more about why that $80,000 death benefit, that rider doesn't pay, and how you know that?
So when you go through the policy, it'll basically say the rider as a fare paying passenger only, and that is kind of typical on some policies. But in this case, I looked at that and said, okay, that's not going to pay out.
And what does that mean, or why do you know that?
From the actual verbiage in the PDF.
What does riding as a fare paying passenger only mean?
That would be like I'm in a train or an airplane paying.
Okay, and so you had to look at the boilerplate of the policy to learn that information?
Yes.
All right. And so then 2 pages before that, we have this page.
Yep.
And that corresponds with, I think, some later pages as well. Can you explain, and I think you were mentioning this earlier, and tell me if it's helpful to go to another page as well as you're kind of explaining this Forrester's policy.
Why don't you go to A so that we have all 3 pages there? That way we have the illustration.
Just 1 second. I don't know. In the PDF. Is it under that? Just 1 second. We're having technical difficulties. Just. Okay. All right, there we go.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so you see this is a guaranteed side of the illustration, and that's going to be a 3% interest rate is the guaranteed lowest that they can go, and it also reflects the mortality charges going to the highest level from day one, and that has not happened. And then you have the non-guaranteed side that's assuming the current cost of mortality charges at the year this was purchased. And number 2, it's saying it's going to be at 5.75% for the duration of its life. If it were to go through that whole runway, you'll notice the death benefit does increase. As cash values move up, it pushes what's called a corridor, and it causes the death benefit to go up. So it keeps going, and then we'll go down to the next page. Okay, perfect. And then we get to the height which is at 91,000, as I mentioned in the note. So at this, at a 5.75%, it gets to that at that point. And then you'll notice it starts to come down if one lived longer time at that point, because the mortality charges at that point start to go up. And then you have the guaranteed, for this policy is a really good guarantee. And so you have it going to year 31 and it lasts to that long and then it stops. What I don't know is if you were to run it now, based upon the performance from the beginning at lower interest rates, what this number here would be if we ran that projection. It's probably going to be somewhere in between, you know, 70 to 90, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's not an extensive amount of increase for that death benefit.
And so essentially you're paying all these premiums over time, and then you're getting some of that money back, but not a ton.
No, what I'm saying is, so you're getting the death benefit at death, okay? What I'm saying, in the scope of a projection of the $700,000 of death benefit that we have now, it's not increasing that amount substantially over time.
And so would it be fair to say that this sort of policy, if you're treating it as an investment, would not be the wisest of choices?
If I'm looking at it as cash, it wouldn't be, this would be more of a death benefit solution as versus a cash value solution. And the reason I say that is because when we run a proposal for a death benefit, we run on a current assumption, the interest rate that we're using, we want to see at age 100, we want to see the same amount of cash in it that the death benefit would be. That's called endowing. All right. So that would be more of an appropriate death benefit. So, and a cash would be a cash solution policy. You're overfunding to create the least amount of expense in it to be able to capture more upside. So this is not made for that. And it's a moderate death benefit solution, because you can see we get to 91, but then we start dropping off.
So the longer you live, the less you can get potentially.
Potentially. I mean, if we started to get 10% interest rates in it, you know, for an extended amount of time, that could help it. But it would not dramatically, it's not going to come in, it's not going to become a $500,000 policy.
All right. Okay, you can have a seat. And this forester's policy that we're talking about, this one was obtained in 2012, is that right?
Correct. October 23rd.
Okay. And in your review of that, of the documents of that policy, and you have it noted here on this sheet, did you see that there was indication that they had received a death claim from Nancy Brophy? And it's on your screen in front of you too.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Okay.
Yes.
And can you just generally explain what a death claim is? We've referred to it a bunch, but what does that mean?
A person will call in on the insurance, and then the carrier sends out, you file a death claim with the carrier. Part of that is that you have to also submit a death certificate. And so, and then they're bound, once that's done, by a certain amount of time that they have to deliver on that, unless there's extenuating circumstances. So it's just a process by the carrier getting reported a death, and then helping that family go through the process to get that taken care of.
All right. And so in other words, and what you see in some of these documents, a person calls in, notifies the insurance company, they may send the documents
That's right.
back. The person fills those out and sends it back.
That's right.
All right.
And then there'll be documents behind the scenes of that correspondence, that communication. They'll when they get the death certificate in, they'll they'll put that in their system. They'll have that all in there.
All right. Okay. And so then, let's talk about, and when you're reviewing these, I know you refer to page 1 specifically of the PDF in your report. Do those notifications, either the form itself, which we'll see some of, or the notification entry, have a date that occurs?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back one to the fidelity policy, back one page, excuse me. And this is the oldest policy that you reviewed, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so you talked a little bit about that, this already, that it's a $100,000 death benefit, and I believe what you said is that will not change.
No, that does change.
Oh, that does change, excuse me. So tell us, again, a little bit about what might change there.
Well, you've already passed the 10-year period. So in the documentation, it'll say the premium back in 04 was $47.09. On 7/28/14, the premium is $103.19. And so that was what was being paid up to the point of death. Then it's going to go up again. It's a guaranteed renewable period. It's just not going up substantially right now because we're talking about a little bit earlier in life. But then as time goes on, it will dramatically go up.
Okay, and so this is one of those policies you mentioned that if you get into your 80s, it's going to be extremely expensive.
It could be. I think it will be at the 80s, but I'd have to go back and review, but I believe it's renewable till age 95.
All right. In this particular policy, and you noted it in your summary, that on page, you noted it as page, I think, 105 of the PDF, that there is, and you noted it within the PDF, and you're looking through these documents, that there was a filled out claimant statement or a life claim.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to hand you what I've marked as States Exhibit 72A, 72 having already been admitted, and this is just a subset of that document. Yes.
I believe so. Yes.
And is that the some of the pages from the PDF the subpoena documents from Fidelity that you reviewed?
Yes.
And so specifically on that first page of that exhibit, is that the life claim that you're referring to, followed then by the death certificate that you described as necessary?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the next we'll move to the life map policy. And I want to talk just briefly. This is one of the two that was in green. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so it looks like the death benefit on this one is relatively small.
Correct.
And from your notes, and if you can confirm, the documents you received didn't have a ton of information. Is that right?
It didn't. It was just like a master contract. And so, and there were some offerings in it. So I didn't know what was taken, etc. It wasn't that much, but it just was unclear exactly what was taking place.
Okay. And so just based on what you were able to review, would it be fair to say you didn't feel comfortable ascertaining that it was definitely in place?
Yes, that would be true.
Okay. And then the second green policy, I'm referring again to that chart at the beginning, is the Lincoln financial policy. And that was also an employment policy. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And in this one, you also weren't entirely, or were you certain that it was in force on June 2nd of 2018?
I don't know.
Okay. In your review of the policy, could you see that, and do you recall reviewing that there was a claim that was made, or a death claim that was filed in that case? And I'm gonna hand you what I've marked as State's Exhibit 75A. Part of the documents that came out have already admitted State 75.
So what I have here is the beneficiary statement and then the death certificate. Correct.
Okay. And so, and that, to be clear, that claim was made following June 2nd of 2018, it would appear.
Yes.
All right, and so if we were to assume that this policy was in force on June 2nd of 2018, can you explain what the death benefit would be? And specifically, I'm looking at that there's a $50,000 death benefit and then also an accidental death benefit of $50,000.
Yeah, the 100,000 would be paid out as long as what some of the exclusions were not incurred. But yes, 100,000.
Okay. And this is one of those policies that has a long list of exclusions for accidental death.
Yeah, we'd have to read through those.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And then next we are back up in our, what I'm referring to as the blue boxes, and looking at the Americo Policy. And so you talked a little bit about this one in your chart that we looked at. And so in looking at this policy, it also has a death benefit of $100,000, and then it has an accidental death benefit. What does that portion mean?
So that one is the $25,000 aid accidental death would be paid out. I do believe on that policy that drops off in 2034. But then you have an additional 25,000 as a common carrier. So if you're on a common carrier, it'd be a 25,000. And then the accidental death would be another 25,000 in that case. Without the common carrier, it'd just be 25,000 additional for an accidental death.
And what's the common carrier, or what is a common carrier?
That would be like I'm on a plane, or paying passenger on a plane.
Okay. And so assuming that's not the case with the death, that the person is not a passenger on a plane or something like that, or on a common carrier, the death benefit of this one would be $125,000 if it were an accidental death?
Correct. On that date, correct.
Okay. Prior to when it drops off?
That's right.
Okay. And you noted here in your notes below, in this particular policy, you included what I'm going to refer to as a screenshot. And it's a portion of the documents that's talking about other policies that have to be disclosed.
Correct.
And what does that mean? And can you talk a little bit about disclosure of other policies when you're applying for life insurance?
Yeah. So when you have what's called an agent's report, and then right prior to that, you're gonna say how much in-force life insurance is on somebody. Because the underwriters want to know how much total life insurance is on an individual to meet what's called whether it's excessive or there's not an insurable interest, to be able to pay it out. So they're going to calculate, they have guidelines that they adhere by based upon age, how much you're making, what might be the total, the death benefit. So disclosing all of the life insurance policies is important from an actuarial standpoint, from an underwriting standpoint, to know what's going on with that individual.
And what happens when you don't disclose prior policies?
Well, it would depend on if the carrier caught it or not, or through what's called the Medical Insurance Bureau, they caught those other policies. So it's a little bit difficult, sometimes for the carriers to catch all of them, especially if they're going through not a fully underwritten contract. So when you have a fully underwritten contract and you're trying to get best rates available, they're going to scrutinize the application. When you do what's called an easy application process, that's, you answer some questions, and then if you can answer no to them, and then when they check behind the scenes with the Medical Insurance Bureau, if they don't see anything different, then they might issue that policy without as much scrutinization.
And if you're going to eat what you referred to as the easier route, are you sometimes paying more for those policies?
You're paying significantly more. And now, again, there's a market where that can be appropriate, like on smaller death benefit solutions, burial policies. That's appropriate. Like there's situations where you need a more simple way to underwrite somebody. So that could be appropriate. I find though, when you start getting into more substantial death benefit, that prudence would say, can I underwrite and get a much smaller premium?
All right. And so when you're noting in this particular case, and in a couple more we'll look at, you've made particular note in this case of the policies that were disclosed. Are there policies you noted that were in place at the time that were not disclosed when this policy was applied for?
So this one was applied for, effective date was 1/21/2014. You have a Forester's policy that was prior to that, and that's on there. And then it says the Mutual of Omaha policy. Yeah, that would have been there too.
Okay, and so for this particular one, you made note of the disclosure of prior policies that were in effect, and that appears to be all that were in effect at that time.
Except for the Fidelity Guarantee Life.
Okay, so that one's not included on here.
That would be the 1994 of $100,000.
Okay. And it appears during the application process for this Americo insurance, that was not disclosed.
That's correct.
All right, looking next at the American policy. In this particular one, you mentioned, I think, as you were going through, that this is a $200,000, excuse me, term policy, and so that amount, or at least till 95, is not going to increase.
That's correct. Well, for 10 years, it doesn't increase. Thereafter, it will.
Okay. All right. And in this particular claim, or this particular set of documents, excuse me, you also highlighted page 11 of the PDF documents, indicating that the only policy disclosed was the Americo policy. Is that right?
That's correct.
And as we've just covered the Americo policy, there were in fact several policies in place at the time that this one was applied for.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'll talk a little bit more about this one in a little bit as we talk about some other pieces. And then we get to the Mutual of Omaha policies. And so we'll kind of go through those just quickly, as we've talked about them a lot. So this is the first of four. And is this one of the policies you determined was ultimately terminated?
Yes.
Okay. And it does look like, though, that you noted when this a policy was applied for,
Real quick.
yes.
So this is correct. The death benefit is 150. I apologize. On the front page, it still reflects that there's a $150,000 accidental death in the gray. That's incorrect. Those two need to be taken off
Okay.
on that. So there's not an accidental death on that. It was a little bit confusing on an application and a specimen that I looked at, but then I verified, and there's only $150,000 death benefit, non-accelerated death. I updated on one of them and not on the other, so I want to make sure we clear that up.
All right, thank you. And is it fair to say that sometimes in the application process for life insurance, that the person applying can mark like what type of insurance they want, or even select or mark a premium that they would prefer to pay or are hoping to pay, and the ultimate like actual insurance that's provided or the actual premium decided might be different than the application?
It could be. You can make decisions during the underwriting process of how you want to end up, and that happens a lot.
Okay, and so as you're going through these documents, is some of the confusion at times either, kind of how the policy was applied for and then the decision making that happened in between?
That's right.
All right. And so there are two more Mutual of Omaha policies that we've already covered that were both terminated ultimately. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so then we're left with our final one. Put on the last page. Yeah. Oh. And so I guess before we move on this Mutual of Omaha policy from 2012, the first of the four, at the time it was applied for, it appears from your review of the documents that the question asking if there's any other insurance coverage was answered as none.
Correct.
And yet there was a policy in place at that time.
The fidelity.
All right. And so then going to the last Mutual of Omaha policy, you mentioned when we were talking about this through the chart that this is, I think you referred to as a family benefit or some sort of double coverage. And you mentioned in this premium column that it's that premium amount, the $67.60, is premium coverage for both Dan and Nancy Brophy.
That was somewhat unclear, but I believe that to be true in there. Both the accidental death contracts, I do know that the premium was 67. I do know that the 250 is the accidental death. I do believe that they both had the coverage on it. But I would have to look at that a little bit more in that and talk to the carrier.
And so is this a policy then that only pays out if there's an accidental death and if that accidental death meets whatever qualification?
That is correct.
All right. And we've talked a bit about disclosure that is required when you're applying for a policy. Do you also have to disclose other policies that you have when you're claiming a death benefit?
That's a good question. In my experience, I think with Mutual of Omaha, they knew the other policies that were there. That's a good question. I don't have the exact answer to that.
Okay. And would part of the review depend on kind of looking at the forms and seeing what they ask for?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So you talked a little bit about, as you're going through the chart, sort of when you're looking at a snapshot, and we talked a bit about it in the total benefit column that we looked at in the chart, about what, if you're looking at a $60,000 gross income, kind of the percentage of income someone's spending on premiums if they're paying $814. You put together this page as well. Can you talk about a little bit about what this looks like and how this kind of translates to what you would recommend or advise?
Yeah, what I wanted to do is kind of take a snapshot of a time in history. And so say we went to the 2016. So I ran a term quote based upon standard rates, and full disclosure, I was not there. I don't know the health of the individual. I did look through the applications, height, weight, non-smoker. I looked at some other things, so I thought it was reasonable to quote standard. So when I looked at it, I said, okay, what might the premium be at that 2016 moment for a $500,000 death benefit 10-year term? So the $200,000 10-year term with American Amicable, you're going to see is $219 per month, right? It's an easy term. It is going to be more expensive because the carrier is taking on more risk, and so they have to charge more on that block of business. So this is an underwritten product, and you're going to see for $250 a month, 10-year term for $500,000, you would be able to ascertain that. So then I asked the question, if we were sitting down and I knew the budget, $60,000 a year at that point, which was disclosed on this application, I would probably ask the question, is that reasonable? You know, $800 a month for $700,000 of coverage, of death benefit. So what I was thinking is, okay, could we have the option of looking at a $500,000 term and then maybe keeping one of the other permanent policies for the duration, but something probably has to give from a budget standpoint so that then I can pay some of the other important things in my budget, like mortgage and other things that I'm paying for. So that would be an important conversation at that point with any couple when they're doing their financial plan. So far, so good? Okay. So then I also offered, you know, what would a 15-year term be? I would probably be a little bit, depending on what the couple wanted to do. If they didn't want to leave, you know, if they wanted to get down to a budget that they realized that they had to keep, then we might go with the 15-year term of the $500,000 and call it good for the moment. So we substantially brought down the budget, something that we can live within. And then number two, if they did want to keep that maybe $100,000 or the Forester's policy at $157 a month, then we have $250 here. So that's roughly a little over $400 a month. So we've cut the budget down in half moving forward at that point. So I think those are the types of conversations that we would want to have with a couple moving forward at that point.
All right, and what we're talking about as we look at this, again, is only the death benefit and the premiums for one of the people in this relationship, is that right?
Yes.
And so we aren't factoring when looking at the $800 a month, any amount of money they're also spending on Mrs. Brophy's life.
Or medical, dental, property and casualty.
And so in part of what you were just talking about, what you would recommend, are you taking, and what you do in your own practice, are you taking into consideration all of those insurances?
I think it's prudent to look at a 10 to 20% budget of your net income with all your insurance.
Instead of 20% of your budget for just one person and only life insurance?
That's correct.
All right. As you went through these policies and read through them and are putting together the documents that you put together, did anything in particular stand out to you? I mean, you talked a little bit about the high amount of premiums they're paying, but what were your thoughts based on your experience as you went through these?
So you know, I deal with a lot of agents. You know, we're a broker general agent, so a lot of premium runs through our agency. And if you have an outlier of what I've seen in planning, this would stand out. It's a high amount of premium. Again, the death benefit's appropriate. I don't have a problem with that. People like the idea of having a legacy. They like the idea, some like the idea of having a death benefit in case something happens with their assets under management or other things. That's important. But there's a balance in life where if you're planning for tomorrow and then you're affecting today too much, that's out of balance. And so it's similar to a young person comes to me and they're just starting their life and they have a kid. And I'm not going to push a permanent life insurance policy when they need a certain death benefit. They're going to buy term. So I don't want to disrupt. At the end of the day, they need an appropriate amount of life insurance for their budget. And so I think the appropriate amount of life insurance is there, but I don't believe the budget was met. And that would be hard.
And with that analysis that you went through, would there be a difference between, say, a couple in their 60s who perhaps one of them is sick, terminally ill, or knows that their life expectancy is going to be cut short, and so it's not going to be a long set of years that they have to pay premiums?
Yep.
Versus a couple who are planning for retirement, planning for the next steps of their lives, travel, purchasing a different home, whatever that may be, but a real kind of long-standing retirement plan.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the biggest fears for retirees, one of them is their risk of longevity, outliving their money. And so there has to be a balance between budget and what you're trying to accomplish with the death benefit. To your point, if somebody is, knows that they have a very bad condition and that their mortality is in the near future, keeping that going, I think we would all agree that that's okay. That'd be something that most of us would consider. But in a normal planning mode for retirement, longevity risk is real, like outliving your money. So sometimes you have to say enough, and where does that lie, right? And that could be different, but I think in this case, it's definitely an outlier for me in what I've seen in planning circles.
And would you say, in this particular case, that for a couple who was planning a long-time retirement plan, that this setup and situation with the different policies makes any financial sense?
No. I mean, it's one of those things where, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And so we have to have a conversation at that, like, what are we trying to accomplish? We're going into retirement. We have longevity risk. We have to pay a mortgage. We have to do things. So I think it's a real question to ask. And again, as you mentioned, we're not talking about any of the insurance on Ms. Brophy or a property and casualty paying auto, fire, and any of that. Or if there's any, I don't know what the union was paying on the medical or if anything else that had to be paid, but I know at my business, employees have to pay some of theirs. So you add all of that, and that becomes part of life. And so I think there's a balance when you look at that.
And so, for example, if you add in another $300+ of premiums being paid, for example, the premiums being paid on Mrs. Brophy's life, and you're looking at over $1,000 a month just on life insurance, if you were advising your own clients, is that something that you would need to seriously revisit?
Inappropriate. We definitely have to talk about that.
And we talked a little bit earlier about sort of the underwriting process and different ways that can happen. If you are selling insurance to yourself or to your spouse, or really if you're selling insurance to anyone in particular, is there a commission aspect that would make certain policies financially lucrative for you to sell?
Well, we all get paid a commission on all of them. And so one of the problems in the industry is you have maybe certain entities that go out and they have a certain product. Maybe it's a permanent product, a whole life product. By itself, it's a good thing, but sold to the wrong person in the wrong part of life, again, going back to my example, why would I sell a $200 a month, $100,000 policy when I'm going to get commission on that total $2,400? Why would I do that when I can sell on a younger couple $30, $40 a month and get more death benefit, right? And so in that scenario, I'm going to make less commission, but I'm going to be doing the right thing because I'm going to be appropriately handling a death benefit. If I have a $700,000 goal and I'm looking at my budget, if I sell a $200 a month benefit, premium, I'm going to get more commission on that versus if on that one I showed you, say that was a 500,000. So it would have been like $100 a month to get a $200,000 policy. And so, and especially when you might not have the money to pay for those things, eventually they might fall off. Like I can't pay them at retirement. So I think you never know, but I think you make the best decision at that moment based upon budget and your and an appropriate death benefit goal.
And when policies do fall off or the premiums then go up as a result of inability to pay, I mean, is that a penalty that you're then dealing with in certain cases, or a hit financially to your plan?
State that another way.
Yeah. Is there, I think you talked about with one of these policies that if you aren't able to pay or you default, it has some significant effects to that policy.
Yeah, like you would have to so you look at the history of some of the payment schedules. And so, on the Mutual of Omaha, you look through the correspondence and you'll see non-sufficient funds. And then you'll have a potential reinstatement process. And a reinstatement process, what that is when your policy goes to lapse, typically you have a 30 to 60 day grace period. But if you go past that, then it goes into what's called a reinstatement period. And carriers are they don't make, you have to requalify medically for the reinstatement period. And so, so that can happen, right? And then the other part is the policy that we have that you spoke about is the no lapse guarantee. So if you get in a non-sufficient fund on that one, then you can seriously affect your guarantees. So, and we've unfortunately had customer service notices come out, or policy owner services, letters to our clients that might have missed some premium payments, and then their guarantee went from 121 down to 98, let's say, because of that missed premium. So, and again, I didn't reflect that here. That's been paid. That policy is fine.
But would it be fair to say that if your concern is the total amount of death benefit, so in this case, $700,000, let's say, if your concern is maintaining that,
Yep.
Would it make sense to get into policies or to purchase policies if you have a very tight budget and a tight turnaround where you can barely afford your policies, let's say? Does it make sense to get policies that if you then default, you're going to lose your death benefit like pretty quickly?
It wouldn't. I think pragmatically, you're going to have to figure out what's the most important to you. And so if you can't sustain a premium over a long duration, what's my best plan B? And my best plan B is in my working years, I have a loss of income that I want to replenish. And so if I can shore that up for a 10 to 15 year period, while I'm still putting away, getting my 401k going, that's going to set me up better for down the road. And I think the hard thing is, as people sometimes, we want the best of both worlds. And someone has to come in and say, that's not possible right now.
And then a question for you, just going back to that Forester's policy we talked about with the loan. If you take out a loan like we saw with the $40,000 Forester's policy, what happens if you don't pay that back?
It comes off the death benefit.
So it's just reducing your death benefit?
Plus all the, I don't know this. So it would probably, that loan that was taken out is probably a no cost loan to very low cost. But there are situations where I've done analysis and that rolled up interest over the years has become fairly substantial. I don't see that here. It's a small loan. Yeah, I don't see that here.
Ms. Herman, I did say we were gonna stop at 4:45. It's now 4:44 and 17 seconds. So let's go ahead and stop for today, and we'll resume at 9 tomorrow.
Okay, Judge, we'll go off the record and I'll disconnect the WebEx. All rise.